With regard to when we go to war, I say we declare war formally as the Constitution says.
How would you propose handling the terrorist problem?
The terrorist problem?
Probably
So
trials. Yeah, the terrorist.
How would I
yeah.
propose? Well, one way is trying to prevent them from coming into our country. And another way is to try to prevent them from organizing. Is that the question you asked? How would I protect against terrorism? One is preventing them from coming into our country. Another is trying to prevent them from organizing to attack us. So, for example, after 9/11, I would have forced a vote if I were there on declaring war with Afghanistan, but I would have voted for it.
How do you address the environment?
I think that we keep the environment clean and safe for everyone by protecting private property rights. So, for example, if you live next to someone with a pigsty, there are ways you go to court and you tell them they can't be dumping manure on your land, they can't be dumping waste products, even odor can be something that can be regulated by courts. But I think private property rights, no one has the right to pollute your land. But then as a society, it gets more complicated because then we say, what is pollution in the air? And then we have to say, what is pollution, then what is acceptable pollution? Or what is acceptable emissions? And I think this might differ somewhat from state to state. For example, in Texas, they have lots of chemical industry, and they like the jobs and the wealth that's generated from it. They might put up with more emissions than they do in Vermont. There's a certain amount of that even now between states. I think one thing that's important about the environment that gets lost in all of this is that, for example, the global warming stuff, I think has been overstated. There may be some warming going on, but it may have something to do more with the sun than it does to do with man.
Amen.
But I would say that as far as pollution goes, another thing, and John Stockwell talked about this some, he went into like a fifth grade class, several fifth grade classes, and he asked them, do you think it's cleaner now, or do you think we're polluting more now or more 40 years ago? Every one of the children in the class would say, oh, it's a lot worse now. That's absolutely false. If you look at pollution with coal...
On the issue of state and national sovereignty, what's your position on the North American Union that could be coming?
I'm opposed to any kind of unified currency for North America or any loss of our national sovereignty by becoming part of any kind of, North American Union. With regard to state sovereignty, I think these are important issues. I'm a big believer in the 10th Amendment. If the powers were not specifically enumerated in the Constitution to go to the federal government, they're left to the states and the people respectively. One of the things I mentioned earlier is a challenge on states' rights, which is the Firearms Freedom Act. In this, different states are manufacturing guns completely within the state, and it's going to be a challenge to the federal government to say, you don't really have a right to regulate guns in Kentucky because it's manufactured and it's not sold across state lines. Most regulations at the federal level, most big government, has all come through an expansive interpretation of the Commerce Clause. They say everything has to do with interstate commerce, even when it has nothing to do with interstate commerce. Real quickly, there was a case in 1942 called Wickard v. Filburn. In that case, a farmer wants to grow 20 acres of grain. He says, I'm just going to feed it to my cattle, I'm going to consume all of it and not sell it. The federal government says, no, you can only grow 10 acres, part of FDR's agricultural plans. And he said, no, it's my land, I'll grow 20 acres. So he goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court rules that by him not selling it, his cattle consumed all of his grain. By him not selling it, he could have indirectly affected the price of grain between states. Therefore, they had the right to regulate it. But from that type of ruling, which I think is bizarre, we got all the big government over the last 60 years. Everything, if they try to justify it all, comes through the Commerce Clause. So I think we do need these challenges. We need to talk more about state sovereignty. We need to talk about our national sovereignty. And I think they're very important subjects. Anybody else?
Ma'am, I asked you earlier today to clarify the statements which they're playing on TV about what you said about the coal industry. And you're saying that they only took part of your statement. Would you please clarify what you really did say?
He takes a statement where I admit, which I think it's kind of silly not to admit, that there are cleaner forms of energy than coal. But does that make me against coal? It just means there are. I mean, hydroelectric is cleaner, solar is cleaner, but we can't get all of our energy from hydroelectric or solar. So by my saying that just means I'm not sticking my head in the ground and saying that everything is perfect and will always be this way. There are other forms. There's nuclear energy. There's a lot of ways we can get energy. We currently get 90% of it from coal, though, and we will for several generations. So a lot of people on the left just want to shut it down. If they do, we'll be using candles again. We're going to be using coal for a generation or two. But it's also not to say that we don't allow other forms of energy to develop. And so it's kind of silly. The silliness of it is, and this is what a lot of people hate about politics, is you take this much of someone's sentence, even in a 3-minute answer, if you take this much of a sentence, it is misrepresenting what the conclusion is. It's taken out of context. And I think it's a very definition of intellectual dishonesty. And I've been giving it right back at him. He was sitting right in front of me the other night, and I told him, I said, if you'll quit attacking me, if you'll take me off of your ads, I'll never mention your name, and I will not put your name in any of my ads, and I won't say anything about you. And I've given him that public challenge now, but I don't think he's going to take it. But if he attacks me, I'm going to have to respond back, because unfortunately that's just the way politics works. Currently, I think congressmen go and they have to sit out a year to lobby. I'd say let's make it maybe forever. I mean, just because a lot of them leave and they can make a lot of money. I mean, the average lobbyist out of Congress. See, the other thing is the only people allowed to go on the floor are ex-congressmen, current congressmen and ex-congressmen. So if you leave office, they pay pretty well for congressmen, but then you leave office, you make $1 million a year, and you're allowed to come down there and schmooze and actually talk to people on the floor of Congress. That's why they pay them so much. But maybe we just shouldn't have ex-congressmen being lobbyists. I think they all ought to be coming home once they're done with their tour up there. But the other thing I proposed is I never liked McCain-Feingold because I think it limits speech. But I think there are ways to limit campaign contributions without limiting speech. So, for example, what I would do is I would have rules on federal contracts. If you want to build the roads in Kentucky and you get federal money and you're going to get $1 million, someone has to do it. But what I would do is I would say, do you want this contract? Here's a clause. You have to sign this clause that says you won't give PAC contributions. And then we're going to base who builds the roads not on how much money you give me, but on who gives the lowest bid, who can do the best job building the roads. So I would make a limit in the contract that says, and you sign it voluntarily, so I don't think I'm taking your right to speech, but you just agree voluntarily not to give PAC contributions, not to lobby Congress, and maybe individual officers not to contribute too. But I think there are ways to limit the people who are getting money. It is galling that there are some contracts that are $1 billion. Sometimes they're $1 billion and it's a no-bid contract. For you to get $1 billion contract, what's the first thing you do? I'm now an ex-congressman. You hire me for $1 million. I go back the next day and ask for another $1 billion. The whole system is crooked and corrupt. But I think we should try to do something. If people obeyed the Constitution, the government wouldn't be doing those things. Wouldn't be passing out the favors. But inevitably, there'll still be some things. Even if the government did mostly national defense like it would be, we still have defense contractors. And that needs to be on the up and up, too. So I think there needs to be limitations on what people who get federal money do in lobbying in return to get more.
I'm a small businessman here in London. What are some of your